Chapter 1. The Iron Whale on the Sand. The wind swept off the gray Atlantic, sharp and relentless, carrying the taste of salt and the deeper chill of northern waters. It scoured the dunes, bending the tough grasses low, and hammered against the incongruous black shape dominating the coastline. Miles from any harbor, miles even from water deep enough to float it, the submarine lay beached like a dead leviathan. Its sheer scale was obscene against the low, windswept landscape of coarse sand and sparse vegetation. A brutal scar of metal thrust onto the shore, impossibly far above the high tide line. Rust wept in long, disfiguring streaks down its curved flanks, the black paint peeling to reveal pitted, angry steel beneath. It was a monument to abandonment, a Cold War relic deposited by some impossible tide. Dr. Lena Mayerva shielded her eyes against the stinging spray, her gaze tracing the immense length of the vessel. The official reports called it the K-329 Kursk, a decommissioned Project 949A anti-class submarine, though registry details were murky, classified even decades after its supposed retirement. How it arrived here on this desolate stretch of the Canadian coast remained unexplained. No storm could account for it, no rogue wave. It simply appeared one morning 3 weeks prior, discovered by a bewildered local fisherman checking his lobster pots. Its presence hummed with wrongness. Lena zipped her heavy weather gear tighter, the sound loud in the wind's brief lull. Her task was straightforward on paper: conduct an initial environmental impact assessment. Sample the surrounding water, the soil, check for radiation leaks from the dormant reactor core. Simple. Yet standing before the silent giant, simple seemed inadequate. Footsteps crunched on the wet sand and crushed shells behind her. Marcus "Mac" Jones approached, carrying a sturdy waterproof case in each hand. He set them down carefully. He was shorter than Lena, built like a fire hydrant, his face weathered from years at sea, creased around narrowed eyes that missed little. He wore practical, heavy-duty coveralls over layers of wool. He nodded towards the submarine, his expression unreadable. "Generators fueled, running smooth over by the truck," Mac reported, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the wind. "Got the lighting rigs, cutters, atmospheric monitor, spreader. Everything you requisitioned, plus a few extras I thought prudent." Lena appreciated his thoroughness. Mac wasn't officially part of her university research team. He was hired locally. Ex-Navy, specialized in marine salvage and hazardous environment entry. His references were impeccable, his rates reasonable for someone willing to approach a potentially radioactive wreck. His silence was part of the package, she gathered. He did his job, asked few questions. "Good," Lena replied, raising her voice slightly. "We start topside. I want external radiation readings first, especially around the reactor compartment housing and any visible vents or seals. Then we check the hatches." "That tide line." Max squinted towards the distant waves, then surveyed the deep trench the submarine's keel had carved into the beach during its inexplicable arrival. Whatever put her here had force behind it, significant force. The geological survey team found no seismic activity that corresponds, Lena stated, pulling a ruggedized tablet from her pack. She tapped the screen with a gloved finger. "The leading theory involves exceptional subsurface currents coinciding with a spring tide, But the math doesn't quite add up. Not for this displacement this far inland. Mac grunted, a non-committal sound. He picked up one of the cases. Theories above my pay grade. Finding a way inside without getting irradiated or sealed in, that's my concern. Hull seems intact mostly. Some buckling near the stern, maybe from the grounding. They walked the perimeter, Lena pausing every few yards to take readings with a handheld Geiger counter and a broader spectrum scanner. The background radiation was slightly elevated, expected near such a mass of metal that had once housed nuclear materials, but nothing alarming yet. The air held a strange metallic tang beneath the salt, almost electric. Lena logged the readings meticulously on her tablet. Most accessible points appear to be the main conning tower hatches or the forward escape trunk, Mac observed, pointing towards the raised structure midship. Aft hatches might be compromised by that buckling. Conning tower first, Lena decided. It offers a higher entry point, less chance of immediate flooding if the internal compartments are breached below the water line. Unlikely, given how high she sits, but caution is warranted. They reached the base of the sail-like conning tower. Looking up, the sheer height of the structure was imposing. Rivets like angry scars patterned its surface. A series of heavy steel rungs were welded to the side, leading up to the main access hatches nearly 30 feet above the sand. "You want the readings up there?" Mac asked. Lena nodded. "Atmospheric monitor too. Let's see what's venting, if anything." Mac secured a climbing harness around his waist, checked the carabiners clipped to his belt. He moved with practiced efficiency, testing each rung before putting his full weight on it. The wind tugged at him, whipping his coveralls, but he ascended steadily, a compact figure against the vast black metal. Lena watched, tracking his progress, her own scanner held ready. He reached the small platform encircling the hatches at the top of the sail. He clipped a safety line to a sturdy railing. Lena saw him unpack the atmospheric monitor, holding it near the sealed edges of the primary hatch. He consulted its display, then shouted down, his words snatched and fragmented by the wind. "Clear, ambient air mostly, trace hydrocarbons, ammonia, negligible rads up here." "Good," Lena called back. "Try the seals on the main hatch." Mac knelt, examining the heavy circular hatch, thick as a bank vault door. He ran a gloved hand around its circumference, then produced a heavy wrench from a tool loop on his belt. He fitted it onto one of the large locking dogs securing the hatch. He strained, putting his weight into it. Metal groaned in protest, a high, grating sound. Rust flaked away. Nothing happened. "Seized solid," Mac yelled down. "Or locked from inside. Try the auxiliary." He moved to a smaller, adjacent hatch, repeating the process. Again, the mechanism refused to budge. He struck the wrench against the hatch surface, producing a dull clang that seemed swallowed by the immense structure. Same, whatever shut this boat down sealed it tight. Mac paused, looking down at Lena. "Plan B, forward escape trunk, or do we cut?" Lena considered. Cutting through the hull was a last resort, time-consuming, noisy, and it compromised the integrity of the vessel further. The forward escape trunk was designed for emergency egress, potentially less fortified. "Try the forward trunk," she instructed. "If that's sealed too, we reassess. Maybe deploy the drone through a vent port first." Mac descended carefully, his boots finding the rungs with assurance. Once back on the sand, he collected his tools. They walked towards the bow, the submarine stretching before them like a segmented beast. The forward escape trunk was located on the main deck, near the torpedo tubes, a smaller raised cylinder with its own hatch. This one looked different. While still imposing, the locking mechanisms seemed less complex than the conning tower access. Mac approached it with the hydraulic spreader, a heavy tool resembling giant metal claws. He positioned the tips against the hatch seam. "Stand clear," he advised. Lena stepped away, finding shelter behind a slight rise in the hull plating. Mac engaged the hydraulics. A low whine emanated from the tool's power pack. The metal tips pressed inwards. A creak echoed from the hatch. Then a louder groan. Mac adjusted the angle, applying more pressure. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold wind. Suddenly, with a piercing shriek of tortured metal, one of the locking lugs snapped. The sound was violent, sharp. Then another gave way with a resonant thunk. The hatch buckled slightly upwards. Mac released the pressure, then used a pry bar to lever the heavy steel disc open the rest of the way. It swung upwards on protesting hinges, revealing a dark, circular opening leading straight down into the submarine's interior. A gust of air puffed out from the opening. It wasn't the stale, oily air they expected. It carried a different smell. Damp earth like a freshly opened cellar overlaid with a faint, cloying sweetness. And underneath it all, the persistent metallic tang. Mac shone a powerful flashlight down the vertical shaft. A narrow ladder descended into blackness. Water glistened on the rungs perhaps 10 feet down, suggesting the lower levels might be partially flooded, but the immediate shaft was clear. "Well," Max said, wiping his brow with the back of his glove. "We're in, or we can be. Your call, Doctor." Lena approached the opening, peering down. The flashlight beam cut a swathe through the darkness, but seemed absorbed quickly, revealing little beyond the ladder and the upper confines of the shaft. The strange, earthy sweet smell was stronger here, mingling with the scent of decay and old machinery. Her scanner chirped softly, indicating slightly higher radiation levels emanating from within, but still below immediate danger thresholds. Her scientific curiosity warred with a primal sense of caution. This place felt wrong, not just abandoned, but expectant, waiting. The unnatural silence from within was unnerving, a stark contrast to the howling wind outside. What could erase an entire crew so completely? What secrets did this iron tomb hold? And what was the source of that smell? She looked at Mac. His face was impassive, waiting for her decision. The mission parameters were clear. Initial assessment. That meant going inside. Lena took a deep breath, the cold, salty air feeling suddenly thin. "Okay, Mac, let's get the atmospheric monitor down there first on a line. Give it 5 minutes. If the air's breathable, we go in." Mac nodded, already reaching for the monitor and a coil of rope. The dark opening yawned before them, a throat leading into the belly of the silent beast. The wind howled around the hull, but down in the shaft, There was only stillness and the faint, sweet scent of decay. The wait began. Chapter 2: The Stillness Within. The atmospheric monitor dangled on the line, spinning slowly in the subterranean gloom of the escape trunk. 5 minutes stretched, measured by the rhythmic sweep of Lena's flashlight beam across the damp metal walls and Mac's steady breathing beside her. The wind outside seemed distant now, replaced by a heavy, pressing silence from below. Finally, Mac hauled the monitor up, its small screen glowing green. "Oxygen levels normal," he reported, unclipping it. CO2 slightly elevated but well within safe limits, trace ammonia same as topside, and that hydrocarbon signature is stronger, temperatures low, 10 degrees Celsius. He sniffed the air coming from the device. Smells definitely stronger down there, like wet leaves and copper. Lena consulted her own scanner again. Radiation remains elevated but stable, nothing acutely dangerous according to these readings. She nodded, securing her tablet in its waterproof pouch. "All right, let's proceed. Standard protocol: maintain visual contact, secure hatches behind us where possible, constant atmospheric monitoring." Mac clipped the monitor back onto his belt harness. He checked the charge on his high-lumen flashlight, identical to Lena's. "You first, Doctor, or shall I lead?" "I'll lead," Lena decided. She needed to see the environment firsthand, unmediated. She swung her legs over the combing, her boots finding the top rung of the ladder. The metal was cold, slick with condensation. She began the descent, her flashlight beam cutting a path downwards. The air grew heavier, colder, the strange sweet earthy smell intensifying with each step down. It wasn't entirely unpleasant, yet profoundly unnatural for the inside of a machine built of steel and wire. The silence deepened, broken only by the metallic echo of her boots on the rungs and the soft whir of the atmospheric monitor on Mac's belt as he followed close behind. Water dripped steadily somewhere below, a rhythmic plink, 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 echoing in the confined space. After perhaps 20 feet, her boots touched solid decking. She swept her light around. They were in a narrow compartment, likely an access passage or staging area just aft of the forward escape trunk. Pipes and conduits lined the curved walls, coated in grime and patches of what looked like dark mold. Peeling paint hung in strips like shed skin. The deck plates underfoot were slick with a thin film of moisture and grit. Directly ahead, a heavy watertight door, operated by a large wheel mechanism, stood slightly ajar. Mac landed beside her, his own light beam joining hers, probing the corners. Pressure hull seems intact here. No obvious signs of flooding in this immediate section. He nudged the watertight door with his boot. It swung inward with a low groan of corroded hinges. Standard compartment access. Lena ran her scanner over the walls, the floor, the door frame. The radiation levels spiked slightly near certain pipe junctions, but quickly subsided. Background radiation is higher internally, Mac, consistent with residual contamination, but watch the readings near containment seals or reactor conduits. Acknowledged. Mac's attention was on the deck. He crouched, shining his light on a dark patch near the wall. "This isn't just water." He touched it with a gloved finger. "Oil, hydraulic fluid maybe, and something else." He rubbed his fingers together. slimy, organic. Lena knelt beside him, aiming her light. The dark patch wasn't uniform. Interspersed within the oily wetness were fine, thread-like filaments, almost like pale hairs clinging to the metal. They seemed to follow the moisture gradient, clustering thickly in the dampest spots. This was the source of the earthy smell, intensified now. Biological, Lena confirmed, pulling a sampling kit from her pack. Carefully, she used sterile tweezers to pluck a few strands, placing them in a vial. Fungal, perhaps, or some kind of extremophile bacterial colony. It didn't match any common mold she recognized. Its structure was too organized, the filaments too uniform. She sealed the vial, labeling it carefully. "Never seen mold grow quite like that on a boat," Mac commented, standing up and sweeping his light through the open doorway. "Especially not with that sweet smell." They proceeded cautiously through the doorway into a larger compartment. Massive, cylindrical shapes dominated the space, mounted horizontally in racks along the walls, torpedo tubes. This was the forward torpedo room. Water pooled several inches deep in the lower sections of the deck, reflecting their lights in broken shards. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water, oil, and that pervasive, sweet, earthy odor. Emergency lights overhead were dark, shattered, or missing entirely. Wires drooped from damaged conduits like metallic vines. But the most striking feature was the emptiness. No bodies, no skeletons picked clean by sea life, no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains beyond the ubiquitous rust. Tools lay scattered on workbenches as if dropped mid-task. A half-finished game of chess sat on a small table welded to the bulkhead, pieces overturned. An open logbook lay sodden and illegible on a console. It was as if the crew had simply vanished into thin air. "Anything?" Lena asked, her voice hushed, absorbed by the sound-dampening effect of the large room and the standing water. Max slowly panned his light across the torpedo tubes. Outer doors seemed secure on tubes 1 through 4. Number 5. "Look." He pointed his beam towards the far end of one massive tube. The inner door was open, revealing the dark cylinder within. That's not standard procedure unless loading or performing maintenance. Lena moved closer, careful not to splash too much in the foul water. The smell was strongest near tube 5. She shone her light inside. The torpedo was gone, the loading cradle empty. But the interior wasn't bare metal. Patches of the strange, filamentous growth coated sections of the tube wall, thicker here, almost like patches of felt. The sweet smell was cloying. "Mac, radiation levels are spiking near this tube," Lena said, watching her scanner display. "Significantly higher than ambient." Mac approached cautiously, his own scanner confirming her reading. "Odd, torpedoes aren't radioactive themselves, not conventionally. Unless," he trailed off, his gaze sweeping the room again, "unless this boat carried something special, experimental ordnance. Or the contamination isn't from the payload," Lena murmured, aiming her light back at the strange growth inside the tube. The filaments seemed to pulse faintly in the beam, an optical illusion caused by shifting shadows or something else. Maybe this growth concentrates residual isotopes, or it's reacting to something within the metal itself. She took another sample, this time scraping a small amount of the thicker material from the tube wall into a separate container. It had a rubbery, resilient texture beneath the surface fuzz. They spent another 30 minutes documenting the torpedo room. Every surface seemed coated in a thin layer of grime. The air remained still cold. The only sounds were their own movements, the constant drip of water from unseen leaks, and the low hum of their electronic gear. The sense of wrongness intensified. The silence felt too deep, the emptiness too absolute. It was the silence of a tomb, but one whose occupants had not merely died but had been erased. Control room should be aft and up a level from here, according to the schematics I reviewed, Lena said, consulting a laminated diagram she pulled from her pack. Through that hatchway. She indicated another watertight door at the far end of the compartment. Mac eyed the door. Unlike the first one, this one was fully closed, the heavy locking wheel spun tight. Let's see if it's cooperative. He gripped the wheel with both hands and heaved. Rust particles rained down. The wheel didn't budge. He repositioned his grip, bracing his feet against the slick deck. He threw his entire weight into it, grunting with effort. Metal screamed in protest, a high-pitched shriek that echoed painfully in the enclosed space. The wheel turned, slowly, grudgingly, maybe an inch. Feels jammed, Mac panted, stepping back, or obstructed from the other side. Lena shone her light on the door's edges. Around the heavy rubber seals, thick clusters of the pale, fibrous growth were visible, almost like the door had been caulked shut with the stuff. It looks like that growth is emptying the mechanism, Mac. It's packed into the seams. Mac frowned, prodding the growth with the toe of his boot. It compressed slightly, like dense moss. Growing right into the works. Great. He looked back towards the escape trunk. We could go back, try a different access point, maybe midship. Lena hesitated. They were making progress, albeit slow and unsettling, and the concentration of the strange biological signature here was significant. Let's try clearing it first. We have tools. Mac nodded grimly. Right, pry bars and elbow grease. He retrieved a long crowbar from his kit. Lena used a scraper tool. They began chipping and prying away the rubbery, fibrous mass packed around the door seal. It came away in damp clumps, releasing puffs of the sweet, earthy scent. It was strangely tenacious, clinging to the metal. As they worked, clearing a section near the locking wheel, Mac tried turning it again. It moved more freely this time, still stiff but turning. He spun it counterclockwise, disengaging the internal locking dogs with heavy clunks. Finally, the last lock released. Mac pulled the heavy door open a few inches. Instantly, the sounds changed. The steady dripping from the torpedo room was overlaid with a new sound from the compartment beyond. A faint, wet, rhythmic scraping. SCRRCH, Schiff, SCRRCH, Schiff. Lena and Mac froze, exchanging glances. Their flashlight beams converged on the dark gap revealed by the partially opened door. The scraping sound continued, slow, deliberate, seemingly coming from somewhere low down, just out of sight within the next compartment. It wasn't the sound of machinery. It wasn't the sound of dripping water. It sounded disturbingly organic. Max slowly reached for the heavy wrench clipped to his belt. Lena tightened her grip on her flashlight, her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs. The silence of the tomb had just been broken. Something was moving in the darkness ahead. Chapter 3: Filaments and Fever. The rhythmic scraping noise SCRRCH, SCHIF, SCRRCH, SCHIF, continued unabated from the darkness beyond the partially opened watertight door. It was a wet, dragging sound utterly alien within the metallic confines of the submarine. Lena held her breath, straining to pinpoint its source. Mac shifted his weight, the heavy wrench held ready in his right hand, his flashlight beam unwavering beside hers, probing the narrow slice of the compartment visible. "Stay sharp," Mac muttered, his voice low and tight. He eased the door open another foot, the hinges groaning like a tormented animal. The scraping didn't stop, didn't react to the noise. It seemed mindless, automated. Lena advanced first, stepping over the high threshold into the new space. Mac followed immediately, covering the angles she couldn't. They were in a narrow corridor, curving gently with the hull. Pipes and electrical conduits lined the overhead and bulkheads, many dangling loose or coated in the same pale, fibrous growth they'd seen in the torpedo room. Here, the growth was thicker, forming fuzzy, vein-like networks that snaked across the metal surfaces, seeming to converge on damp patches and leaky pipe joints. The sweet, earthy smell intensified, becoming almost cloying, mixed with the acrid tang of ozone and mildew. The source of the sound was just ahead, around a slight bend in the corridor. A single emergency light flickered erratically nearby, casting long, dancing shadows that made the growth seem to writhe. The scraping was louder now, accompanied by a soft, wet gurgling. Lena held up a hand, signaling Mac to halt. She edged forward, keeping her flashlight beam trained low. As she rounded the bend, the beam illuminated the source. Her breath hitched. It was, or had been, human. The figure was slumped against the far bulkhead, near a ventilation grate from which thick tendrils of the pale growth emerged like grotesque ivy. It wore the tattered remains of a submariner's uniform, soaked and stained. But the body itself was wrong. Patches of the uniform were fused with the skin beneath, which was unnaturally pale, almost translucent and puffy. Where skin was visible, it was covered in a fine network of the same white filaments that coated the walls. The figure's head lolled forward, chin resting on its chest, but the horror was its right arm. The arm was extended, moving stiffly, rhythmically. SCRRCH, SCHIF. It scraped against the metal deck plate back and forth, back and forth. The sleeve was shredded, revealing an appendage swollen and distorted. Pale, fungal-like growths erupted from the flesh, soft and bulbous, resembling sickly white mushrooms or sea anemones clinging to a rock. The fingernails were gone, worn down to bloody stumps from the constant scraping against the steel deck. The motion seemed involuntary, spasmodic, yet relentlessly steady. The gurgling sound came from its chest, a wet, rattling breath drawn through lungs likely compromised by the pervasive growth. "My God," Lena whispered, unable to look away. It wasn't merely dead, it was occupied, animated by the spreading organism within it. A bloom host, perhaps the first one they'd encountered. Mac moved up beside her, his flashlight beam fixed on the figure. His face was grim, etched with a mixture of disgust and professional assessment. He kept the wrench held defensively. Is it aware? Lena shook her head, though she wasn't certain. The movement seems reflexive, uncoordinated, like nerve signals firing erratically. She raised her scanner. The radiation levels around the figure were higher than the ambient corridor readings, significantly so. It's concentrating the isotopes, or the growth thrives on the radiation. The figure showed no reaction to their presence, its arm continuing its dreadful, repetitive scraping. SCRRCH, Schiff, SCRRCH, Schiff. The sound grated on Lena's nerves, a constant reminder of the biological horror consuming this vessel. We need to pass it to continue down the corridor, Max stated quietly. Can we disable it without spreading whatever that is? Lena considered. Touching it seemed incredibly risky. Let's give it a wide berth. Stay against the opposite bulkhead. Don't disturb it if we can avoid it. Mac nodded curtly. He went first, pressing himself against the far wall, moving slowly, deliberately. His light remained on the figure. Lena followed, her gaze flicking between the path ahead, the scanner readings, and the horrifying tableau beside her. As she passed, the sweet, cloying smell was almost overpowering. She could see the filaments covering the figure's visible skin pulsing faintly, rhythmically, almost like capillaries. The gurgling breaths were louder up close. She resisted the urge to retch, forcing herself to keep moving. They cleared the figure without incident. It continued its mindless scraping, oblivious. Lena let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The corridor opened slightly ahead into what appeared to be a small mess area or lounge. Overturned tables and benches lay scattered. Lockers stood open, their contents spilled onto the deck. Personal effects, faded photographs pinned to a bulkhead, a worn paperback book, a lone chess piece were coated in dust and the ubiquitous pale growth. The water underfoot was deeper here, swirling with oily residue and clumps of floating filaments. Looks like they left in a hurry, Mac observed, nudging a fallen chair with his boot. Or something came through here in a hurry. Lena scanned the room. Radiation is lower here, back to ambient internal levels. She pointed towards another watertight door on the far side. That should lead further aft, towards the command and control sections. Mac approached the door, examining its seal. This one seemed less encumbered by the growth, though patches still clung to the metal. He gripped the wheel. Let's hope this one's easier. It was. The wheel turned smoothly, the locking dogs disengaging with satisfying clicks. Mac pulled the door open, revealing another corridor, this one wider, seemingly a main thoroughfare. Emergency lights flickered more consistently here, providing a dim, greenish illumination. Several doors branched off this main corridor, likely leading to crew quarters, storage, or equipment rooms. Okay, Lena said, consulting her diagram again. According to this, the control room should be up one level. There should be a ladder access nearby. Crew quarters are along this level. She indicated the doors lining the corridor. Let's check one of the quarters first. See if we can find any logs, personal effects, anything that tells us what happened. Mac nodded. Sensible. Nearest one is here. He gestured to a door marked with faded Cyrillic lettering and a number. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open cautiously. It swung inward, revealing a cramped cabin, typical submarine berthing. Two bunks folded against the bulkhead. A small desk bolted to the floor. A single locker. But everything was coated in a thick layer of the pale, fibrous growth. It draped over the bunks like morbid blankets, filled the locker like obscene cotton candy, and matted the desk surface. The air inside was heavy, stagnant, the sweet smell overpowering. "This is advanced," Lena murmured, stepping just inside the doorway, unwilling to venture further into the contaminated space. Her scanner beeped insistently. "Radiation is significantly higher in here. Whatever started in the torpedo room, it's pervasive on this deck." "Looks like it grew right out of the ventilation." Mac pointed towards a ceiling vent choked with the stuff. Tendrils snaked down the walls from it. "If this was airborne." "Spores," Lena breathed. "The mycelial mesh theory. It releases spores, they get into the ventilation, circulate through the boat. Infection spreads rapidly." She shone her light onto the desk. Beneath the fuzzy layer of growth, she could make out the shape of a small, metallic object. A data slate, perhaps. "Can you reach it?" she asked Mac. Mac hesitated, looking at the thick contamination. "Need the sample kit again. Long tongs. Don't want to touch that stuff directly." Lena retrieved the kit. Mac carefully extended the sterile metal tongs, parting the fibrous mass on the desk. He managed to grip the edge of the slate and lift it free. It was coated in a slimy residue and filaments, but seemed structurally intact. He dropped it carefully into a contamination bag Lena held open. "Anything else visible?" Lena asked, scanning the cramped room with her light. "Just this." Mac pointed towards the lower bunk. Tucked beneath the growth-covered mattress, barely visible, was the corner of what looked like a child's drawing. Crayoned colors, stark against the bleak surroundings. Lena felt a pang of unease. A child's drawing on a nuclear submarine. It made no sense, unless crew brought personal mementos. She directed Mac's tongs towards it. He carefully extracted the paper. It was damp, the colors slightly smeared, but the image was clear. It depicted a crude, blocky submarine, much like the K-329, sitting on yellow sand under a bright sun. But crawling out of the hatches weren't sailors. They were monstrous figures, stick-limbed and distorted, covered in scribbled white lines like the filaments. And standing on the beach nearby was a small figure, presumably the artist, watching. "Creepy," Mac muttered, dropping the drawing into a separate evidence bag. "Kid had an imagination." "Or they saw something," Lena replied softly, her mind racing. The drawing felt too specific, too resonant with what they were finding. They sealed the cabin door, marking it with a grease pencil as heavily contaminated. As they turned back to the main corridor, a low hum suddenly filled the air. The flickering emergency lights steadied, brightening slightly. Somewhere deep within the submarine, machinery whirred to life. "What was that?" Lena asked sharply, her head snapping up. Mac checked the atmospheric monitor clipped to his belt. No change in air quality. Sounds like auxiliary power, backup generator. But what triggered it? Lena swept her light down the corridor. The greenish emergency lights now cast a steadier, harsher illumination. The growth on the walls seemed darker, denser under the improved light. The humming persisted, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated faintly through the deck plates. It wasn't loud, but its sudden presence after hours of near silence was deeply unnerving. Could be automated systems responding to us opening hatches, changing internal pressure, Max suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Possibly, Lena conceded, or maybe something else is waking up. She looked towards the direction of the control room access ladder. Let's keep moving. I want to reach control, see if we can access the ship's main logs. They located the ladder shaft access a little further down the corridor. It was another vertical tube, similar to the forward escape trunk but wider, leading upwards. Mac checked the rungs. Seems clear. No obvious growth obstruction here. Okay, Lena said. Upwards, control room next. Mac started the ascent. Lena followed, her thoughts preoccupied by the reactivated power, the child's drawing, the spore-filled cabin, and the scraping figure still dragging its ruined arm back and forth in the darkness behind them. The submarine was not dead. It was occupied, infested, and now it seemed to be stirring. As Mac reached the top of the ladder and pushed open the hatch into the level above, he paused. "Lena," he called down, his voice tight with a new urgency. "You need to see this." Lena climbed faster, joining him at the top. They emerged into a wider space, clearly a primary command level. Consoles lined the walls, screens dark, but that wasn't what Mac was looking at. He was pointing towards a heavy steel door across the room, marked with a red biohazard symbol and Cyrillic lettering that Lena recognized. Medical Bay. The door was sealed tight, but from behind it came a low, guttural moaning, accompanied by a frantic, rhythmic banging, as if someone or something was desperately trying to get out. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet of the command level, chilling Lena to the bone. The power hummed steadily beneath their feet. The scraping figure was below, and now something was awake and furious in the medical bay. The silence was definitively broken. Chapter 4: Echoes in the Machine. The banging from behind the medical bay door was heavy, frantic. Not the rhythmic scraping of the figure below, but desperate, powerful impacts, punctuated by low, choked moans that vibrated through the steel deck. Thump, thump. Oh, thump. The red biohazard symbol seemed to pulse under the steady green emergency lights. Lena stared at the door, her scientific detachment momentarily fractured by raw apprehension. What is in there? Max shifted his stance, wrench still held ready. Whatever it is, it's strong and unhappy. He ran his flashlight beam over the door's seals. Thick welds, heavy locking mechanisms. It was built like a vault. Doesn't look compromised. Yet. Thump, thump, thump. The impacts grew faster, more insistent. The guttural moaning intensified into something closer to a pained roar. Control room first, Lena decided, forcing her gaze away from the shuddering door. We need information. Logs, system status, anything. Dealing with that without understanding the situation is too risky. Her voice was steadier than she felt. She started developing a dry, tickling cough, clearing her throat quietly. Probably just the foul air, the dust. Mac nodded, his eyes lingering on the medical bay door for a moment longer before turning away. Agreed. Control should be through here. He indicated a large archway further down the command-level corridor. They moved past rows of darkened consoles and equipment racks. The low hum of the recently activated auxiliary power a constant presence. The air here felt slightly less heavy, though the underlying sweet, earthy scent persisted. The pale, fibrous growth was less prevalent on this level, confined mostly to corners and ventilation grates, as if its main infestation centered on the decks below. The archway opened into the heart of the submarine, the control room. It was larger than Lena expected, dominated by a central plotting table surrounded by banks of consoles dedicated to navigation, sonar, weapons systems, and reactor monitoring. Chairs were overturned. Manuals and charts lay scattered across the floor, some ripped or stained. A shattered thermos lay near the periscope housing. Unlike the eerie emptiness below, this room spoke of sudden, violent panic. Multiple screens on the consoles were dark, cracked, or displayed only static. However, fueled by the auxiliary power, several key displays were active, glowing with default diagnostic messages or error codes in stark white Cyrillic text. The low hum was louder here, emanating from the energized equipment. "Looks like a fight happened," Mac observed grimly, nudging a fallen stool with his boot. He shone his light onto a dark stain spreading across a console panel. Not rust, dried blood. Lena moved towards the main navigation console, her scanner sweeping the area. Radiation levels are stable, higher background but no hot spots. She coughed again, a dry rasp. She ran a gloved hand over the console surface, careful to avoid the bloodstain. Powers active on several core systems. Navigation, life support monitoring. Reactor status seems nominal, on standby at least. "Can we access the logs?" Mac asked, peering over her shoulder. "Trying now." Lena tapped commands onto a touch-sensitive section of the console. The system responded sluggishly, displaying error messages about corrupted data blocks and unauthorized access attempts. Security protocols are still active, and it seems someone tried to wipe the logs before. Well, before whatever happened. Thump crack. A noise louder than before echoed from the corridor, followed by a drawn-out metallic groan. The medical bay door. Mac glanced back towards the archway. Whatever's in there is making progress. Lena focused, trying different command overrides based on standard Soviet-era naval protocols she'd researched. Almost. There's a backdoor diagnostic port, if it wasn't physically disabled. She located a small, covered port on the side of the console, plugging in a universal interface cable connected to her tablet. The tablet screen flickered, lines of code scrolling rapidly. Authentication required. Lena entered a series of default maintenance passwords. Access denied. Access denied. She tried algorithms designed to bypass older systems. Processing. Access granted. Limited. "I'm in," she breathed, "but it's fragmented. Large sections of the main log are corrupted or deleted. Let me see what survived." She initiated a search for the final recorded entries, filtering by date and time stamps closest to the estimated time of the sub's beaching. The system churned, accessing damaged memory sectors. Max stood watch, occasionally sweeping his light around the control room, his attention divided between Lena's work and the ominous sounds from the medical bay, which had now fallen into an unnerving silence. The sudden absence of noise was almost more disturbing than the banging. "Getting something," Lena murmured. "Sensor logs, final dive sequence. They were deep, extremely deep, off official charts in an uncharted trench system." Her eyes scanned the data scrolling across her tablet. Biological sensor readings are anomalous. High-yield biomass signatures detected externally. Unclassified morphology. "The things from the sonar logs?" Mac asked. "Possibly, but this is different. This data is from internal sensors." Lena frowned, tapping the screen. "Atmospheric analysis from ventilation shafts, detecting complex proteins, airborne particulate matching. Damn it, the file cuts off." She tried accessing related data streams. Cross-referencing with crew medical logs. Most are wiped, but fragmentary entries remain. Reports of rapid onset respiratory distress, skin irritations, hallucinations. Escalating aggressively in the final hours. She pulled up a schematic of the ventilation system, overlaying it with the biological sensor data. The highest concentrations originated near auxiliary storage C and the adjacent medical bay filtration system. That's where the airborne particulate count spiked first. Suddenly a new sound reached them, faint but distinct, a soft rhythmic scraping, not from the medical bay, from above. SCRRCH, SCRRCH. Mac's head snapped up, his flashlight beam instantly directed towards the ceiling conduits and vents overhead. "Did you hear that?" Lena nodded, muting the tablet audio. They listened intently. The low hum of the consoles, the distant drip of water from below, and, yes, SCRRCH, SCRRCH, metal on metal. Fainter than the figure below decks, stealthier, moving slowly within the ductwork above the control room. "Merrick," Lena whispered, recalling the name associated with the mutated watcher mentioned in the initial sparse reports. Corporal Merrick, the supposed sole survivor. Mac didn't answer, his attention fixed on a large ventilation grate directly above the main plotting table. The scraping seemed to be coming from that direction. He slowly raised the heavy wrench. Lena quickly turned back to the tablet, trying to access any visual logs. Security cameras. Most feeds are offline or corrupted. Trying internal feeds near medical or storage C. The screen flickered. A corrupted image file loaded partially. Grainy, low-resolution footage from a fixed camera angle, time-stamped roughly 3 weeks prior. It showed a corridor, possibly near the medical bay. Figures in hazmat suits struggled with a heavy containment crate marked with multiple biohazard warnings. The crate tipped, something dark spilled. The footage dissolved into static, but just before it cut out, Lena saw pale, filament-like tendrils spreading rapidly from the spilled substance across the deck. "Containment breach," Lena said aloud. "Auxiliary storage, see it happen just before everything went silent." SCRRCH, bang, a louder noise from overhead. Dust showered down from the ventilation grate. Mac was watching. The scraping stopped. Silence returned, thick and heavy, broken only by the machinery's hum. "He knows we're here," Mac stated flatly, his knuckles white where he gripped the wrench. Lena felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. They were trapped between whatever horror was locked in the medical bay and a potentially hostile, mutated survivor stalking them from the vents. And they were breathing air potentially laced with infectious spores. Her cough returned, harsher this time, leaving a metallic taste in her mouth. She quickly took a sip of water from her canteen. "We need to find a way to neutralize the source," Lena said, trying to keep her voice clinical. "The mycelial mesh. If it's spore-based, we need filtration containment suits." "Which we don't have," Mac cut in. "And neutralizing that growth might be easier said than done. It seems embedded." "There might be something in the ship's logs," Lena insisted, turning back to her tablet. "Damage control reports, emergency procedures for biological contamination." She scrolled rapidly through fragmented files. "Wait, audio log segment, final entry from the captain's station. Playing now." She tapped the screen. Static hissed, then cleared slightly, revealing a panicked voice, overlaid with shouts and alarms in the background. "Ector shielding compromised. Containment failed. Section 7 sealed, but it's spreading through the vents. Gods, the spores. Merrick, get out of medical. Seal the door. Don't let TH." The audio cut abruptly, replaced by a deafening burst of static and a sound like tearing metal. Lena stared at the tablet, the silence in the control room profound. Section 7, Medical Bay. Merrick was inside when it was sealed. "Siarike." Both Lena and Max spun towards the sound. It came from the corridor, the medical bay door. It wasn't banging anymore. Instead, the thick steel door was visibly bowing outwards in the center, the metal groaning under immense, constant pressure from within. A thin crack appeared near the upper hinge, widening slowly, accompanied by a high-pitched metallic screech. Whatever was inside was no longer just banging. It was breaking out. Chapter 5, Pressure Point. The screech of stressed metal intensified as the crack in the medical bay door widened. Thin tendrils of the pale, fibrous growth, impossibly strong, squeezed through the widening gap, probing the air like eyeless snakes. The low hum of the auxiliary power seemed to vibrate in sympathy with the door's groaning protest. The rhythmic pressure from within was relentless, methodical. "It's coming out," Max stated unnecessarily, his voice tight. He took a step back from the archway leading to the corridor, positioning himself between Lena and the impending breach. "We need to move. Now." "Where?" Lena demanded, her mind racing, trying to process the implications. Merrick sealed in medical during the breach. The violent banging, now this impossible pressure. Was that Merrick, or what he became, or something else entirely locked in with him? Back down. The forward escape trunk might be compromised if that scraping thing overhead reaches it. "Aft," Mac decided quickly, glancing at the control room's layout schematics still displayed on a functioning monitor. "Engine room. Reactor compartment access. There might be emergency exits or at least more defensible positions. Heavy shielding." "SCRECH crack." A larger section of the medical bay door buckled outwards, the gap widening significantly. A thick, pulsating mass of the white filament growth bulged through the opening, writhing like a nest of albino worms. The low, guttural moaning from within rose in pitch, becoming a wet, agonized shriek. "Move!" Mac grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her away from the consoles towards the aft section of the control room. They scrambled past the central plotting table, heading for another archway that presumably led towards the submarine's engineering sections. The air filled with the shriek of tortured metal from the corridor behind them. Lena risked a glance back just as the medical bay door ripped free from its upper hinge with a deafening crash, swinging downwards, held only by the mangled lower hinge. Framed in the ruined doorway wasn't a single figure. It was a pulsing, conglomerate mass. Fused bodies, limbs, torsos, heads barely recognizable, all encased and bound together by the thick, throbbing mycelial growth. Pale filaments writhed across its surface, studded with clusters of the obscene mushroom-like structures. It wasn't Merrick alone. It looked like several crew members, perhaps the initial medical team caught in the outbreak, fused into a single grotesque entity by the rampant organism. Its collective moaning was a chorus of agony and mindless hunger. It began to ooze, to flow rather than step, out of the medical bay and into the corridor, dragging ruptured limbs and trailing sticky filaments. "Don't look, just run," Mac yelled, shoving Lena ahead of him through the aft archway. They plunged into another corridor, this one dominated by heavy conduits and thick piping associated with the reactor and engine systems. The low hum of power was stronger here, the air warmer. Warning signs in Russian plastered the bulkheads. "Reactor control," Lena shouted over the receding sounds of the composite horror lumbering down the command-level corridor. "This way," Mac pointed to a heavy, lead-lined hatch set into the bulkhead, marked with radiation hazard trefoils. "Shielded access tunnel. Should bypass the main engineering spaces and lead towards the stern escape trunk." He spun the locking wheel. Unlike the doors below, this one opened smoothly, revealing a narrow, cylindrical tunnel lined with thick gray panels. The air inside smelled faintly of ozone. Mac ducked inside, pulling Lena after him. He slammed the heavy hatch shut, spinning the wheel tight just as a wet, heavy thud impacted the outside of the door. The composite creature was pursuing them. They were plunged into near darkness, lit only by the beams of their flashlights reflecting off the dull lead lining. The tunnel was barely wide enough to walk single file. It curved gently downwards. "Keep moving," Mac urged, pushing Lena forward. "This tunnel should be shielded, but I don't know how long that hatch will hold if that thing keeps pounding on it." They half-walked, half-stumbled through the oppressive confines of the tunnel. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths, the scuff of their boots, and the distant, muffled thuds against the hatch behind them, already growing fainter as they moved deeper. Lena coughed again, a series of deep, racking spasms that left her breathless. "Lena, you okay?" Mac asked, pausing, his light catching the concern on her face. "Fine," she choked out, waving him on, though the metallic taste was stronger now, and a faint dizziness swam at the edges of her vision. "Just the air, dust." She pushed the thought away. No time for weakness. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel ended at another heavy, lead-lined hatch. Mac checked the seals, listened intently. No sounds from the other side. He opened it cautiously. They emerged into a cramped compartment filled with complex machinery, valves, and gauges, likely auxiliary reactor control or a coolant processing station. The ambient temperature was noticeably higher here, the air thick with the smell of hot metal and oil, overriding the sweet scent of the mycelial growth, which seemed less prevalent in this hotter section. The low hum of power was a deep, resonant thrum. Reactor compartment should be through there. Mac pointed to another sealed bulkhead door. But the stern escape trunk access should be this way. He indicated a narrow ladder leading upwards towards another, smaller hatch in the ceiling. Escape trunk, Lena agreed immediately. Getting out was paramount. Understanding could come later if they survived. Mac tested the ladder rungs. Solid. He started climbing. Lena followed, her muscles aching, her lungs burning with each breath. The exertion made her cough again, harder this time. She tasted blood. Mac reached the top hatch and spun the wheel. It opened onto a small platform at the base of another vertical escape trunk, similar to the one they'd entered through at the bow, but drier, cleaner. Less evidence of the pervasive growth here. A ladder ascended into darkness above. "Looks clear," Mac reported, shining his light upwards. "This leads straight to the deck. Let's get out of this rust bucket." He started climbing the escape trunk ladder. Lena took hold of the rungs, preparing to follow, but a wave of intense dizziness washed over her. The metal rungs seemed to waver in her vision. Her breath hitched. She leaned her forehead against the cold steel for a moment, fighting for control. "Lena," Mac called down, noticing her pause. "Coming," she managed, forcing her limbs to move. She ascended slowly, each rung an effort. The metallic taste in her mouth was stronger, accompanied by a strange pressure building behind her eyes. Mac reached the top, pushing open the heavy deck hatch. Cold, blessedly clean sea air flooded down the shaft, smelling of salt and rain. Gray daylight spilled in. Freedom was right there. "Almost there," Mac encouraged, reaching a hand down. Lena climbed the last few rungs, the dizziness intensifying. As she reached the top, grasping Mac's outstretched hand, another coughing fit seized her. It was violent, uncontrollable. She doubled over, gasping for breath. When the fit subsided, she looked down at her glove. It wasn't just the metallic taste anymore. Bright red blood flecked the dark fabric, mixed with something else. Tiny, glistening white filaments, like the ones coating the dead crewman's arm, like the ones scraped from the torpedo tube. She stared at her glove, horror washing over her in an icy wave. The spores. She was infected, breathing them in, the dust, the air. It hadn't just been irritation. It was colonizing her lungs. Max saw it too. His eyes widened slightly, his expression hardening. He looked from her glove to her face, noting the feverish glint in her eyes, the unnatural paleness beneath the grime. "Lena," he started, his voice low. Before he could finish, a low alarm klaxon began to blare throughout the submarine, echoing up the open escape trunk. A synthesized voice, speaking Russian, repeated a clipped warning. Warning lights flashed on a panel near the hatch combing. Lena, despite her state, recognized some of the words from her research. "Vnemania. Pelote ye ya ge ye ye te ichelen o ste ye la ke te o en o ge o te s ye ka. V-N-E-M-A-N-E. What is it? Mac demanded, looking down the shaft as if expecting the composite creature to emerge. Reactor containment breach, Lena translated, her voice hoarse, detached. Pressure loss, it's going critical. The low hum of the auxiliary power abruptly died. The emergency lights flickered out, plunging the escape trunk into near darkness, lit only by the weak daylight from the open hatch above and their faltering flashlights. The klaxon stuttered and died. Silence fell, broken only by the distant groan of the submarine's tortured structure and Lena's ragged breathing. The pressure loss, the auxiliary power cut. It wasn't an accident. Something or someone had deliberately sabotaged the reactor's cooling or containment systems. Merrick, or maybe the nanites mentioned in some fragmented theories, trying to sterilize the biological threat. Mac grabbed her arm again, harder this time. Out, now. Forget the infection, the whole damn boat could go up. He hauled her bodily out of the hatch onto the windswept upper deck of the submarine. The cold rain felt shocking against her feverish skin. The gray sky pressed down. The escape felt hollow, tainted. She had carried the horror out with her. It was inside her, growing. Max slammed the heavy escape hatch shut behind them, spinning the locking wheel tight, as if that could contain the catastrophe brewing below. He looked wildly around the deck, towards the distant shore. We need to get clear, as far as possible. But as they stood on the rusting deck preparing to climb down the hull, a new sound reached them, carried on the wind. A low, mechanical whirring, not from the submarine, from the sky. Lena looked up. Descending through the low clouds, its silhouette stark against the gray, was a military helicopter. No markings visible, painted a flat, non-reflective black. It wasn't Coast Guard. It wasn't search and rescue. It hovered purposefully, rotors beating the air, its attention fixed entirely on the beached submarine and the two figures standing on its deck. Agent Davies, Lena thought, a cold dread replacing the feverish panic. The ruthless cleanup crew had arrived, and they weren't here to rescue anyone. They were here for containment. Chapter 6: Containment Protocol. The roar of the helicopter's rotors battered them, pressing down like a physical weight. Cold rain plastered Lena's hair to her skull, mingling with the sweat beading on her feverish skin. The black machine hung almost directly overhead, a predatory insect against the turbulent gray sky. No markings, no identification, just matte black efficiency and menace. Max shielded his eyes, squinting up at the belly of the aircraft. He spared a quick glance at Lena, at the bloody filaments on her glove, his expression hardening into grim resolve. Fear was a luxury they couldn't afford. Pragmatism took over. Infected or not, Lena was his only way off this ticking time bomb, the only other person who knew even a fraction of what lurked inside the K-329. "They're not here to help," Max stated, his voice strained against the rotor wash. "That's military hardware, unmarked, means deniable ops, cleanup crew." Lena nodded, wiping her mouth with the back of her other, clean glove. The metallic taste lingered, thick and vile. "Agent Davies." "Doesn't matter who," Mac cut her off. "We're loose ends, witnesses to whatever this boat brought back, and now we're contaminated." He looked down at the hull stretching beneath them towards the sand far below. We climb, now, before they decide to solve the problem from the air. He didn't wait for agreement, already moving towards the edge of the flat deck, assessing the best route down the curved flank of the submarine. The hull plates were slick with rain and rust, offering treacherous handholds. Welded rungs, like the ones on the conning tower, were sparse here near the stern. Lena forced her protesting limbs to follow. Each step sent a jolt through her body, aggravating the pressure behind her eyes. The world seemed too bright, too loud, despite the overcast sky and the roar of the helicopter. The pale filaments on her glove seemed to pulse faintly in her peripheral vision. A voice boomed from the helicopter, amplified, distorted by the wind and rotors, speaking clear English. "Remain where you are. Do not attempt to leave the vessel. This is a restricted military quarantine zone. Await instructions." "Instructions," Max scoffed, already swinging a leg over the side, finding a precarious foothold on a protruding weld seam. "Their instructions will be lie down and die quietly." He looked back at Lena. "Come on, move." Hesitantly, Lena followed, her movements clumsy, hampered by the dizziness and the racking cough that threatened to return. The metal was freezing cold beneath her grasping fingers. The drop to the sand looked terrifyingly far. The helicopter maintained its position, observing them like a hawk. No shots yet, but the threat was implicit in its unwavering surveillance. They were playing chicken, betting that whoever was in charge wanted them alive, at least initially, perhaps for debriefing, perhaps to study the infection. They descended slowly, painfully. Mac moved with a grim determination, testing each hold before trusting his weight guiding Lena when she faltered. The wind tore at them, trying to pry them loose. Rain blurred Lena's vision. Several times her foot slipped on the slick metal, only Mac's steadying grip preventing a fall. Her breathing grew ragged. The exertion fueled the fire in her lungs. Another coughing fit racked her, forcing her to cling desperately to the hull, knuckles white. She tasted more blood. Spots danced before her eyes. Through the haze of pain and fever, she thought she saw the pale, fibrous growth spreading across the rusted metal plates around her handhold, pulsing faintly. She blinked hard. It vanished. Hallucination, or was the mesh already affecting her perception? "Final warning," the voice boomed again from above. "Cease your descent. Return to the upper deck immediately. Non-compliance will be met with lethal force." "They're getting impatient," Mac grunted, glancing upwards. The helicopter hadn't moved, but side doors might have opened. It was hard to tell against the dark fuselage. "Faster, Lena." They were maybe 30 feet above the sand now, the most dangerous part of the descent remaining, a sheer, rivet-studded section with few obvious holds. Mac paused, scanning the hull below them. Suddenly, a loud hiss erupted from a seam nearby, followed by a plume of scalding steam venting outwards. Mac recoiled, pulling Lena back just in time. "Reactor pressure," he yelled. "The system's failing catastrophically. It's venting." The entire structure of the submarine seemed to groan around them, a deep, resonant sound of metal under unbearable stress. Another jet of steam erupted further down the hull. The helicopter reacted instantly. It shifted position slightly, ascending perhaps 50 feet, putting more distance between itself and the venting submarine. A calculated risk assessment by the pilot. "Go, go now," Max shouted, seeing their chance in the momentary distraction. He practically threw Lena towards the next available foothold, a rusted mooring cleat. He followed, scrambling down with reckless speed. They half climbed, half slid the remaining distance, the rough rivets tearing at their clothes and gloves. Lena landed heavily on the wet sand, collapsing onto her hands and knees, gasping, another cough tearing through her. Mac landed beside her, scanning their surroundings. They were exposed. Open beach stretched before them, offering little cover besides sparse dunes further inland. The relentless wind swept across the sand. Behind them, the iron whale groaned and hissed, venting steam like a dying beast, the threat of imminent meltdown palpable. Above, the helicopter repositioned, its attention now fully fixed on the two figures on the sand. A spotlight flared from the underside of the aircraft, pinning them in its harsh white glare. "Subjects are hostile and contaminated," the amplified voice declared, colder now, devoid of any pretense of warning. "Lethal containment protocol authorized. Deploy ground team Alpha. Secure the subjects. Minimize collateral contamination." As the words echoed across the beach, dark shapes detached from the helicopter. Figures rappelled down ropes with swift, military precision, landing silently on the sand between the submarine and the dunes, fanning out, weapons raised. They wore full black tactical gear, helmets with smoked visors obscuring their faces, moving with practiced, menacing coordination. Agent Davies' ground team. Mac grabbed Lena's arm, hauling her to her feet. "Run!" he yelled, pulling her towards the nearest cluster of dunes, away from the advancing soldiers. Lena stumbled, her vision swimming. The white filaments on her glove seemed brighter now, almost luminous in the helicopter's spotlight. She could feel a strange warmth spreading through her chest, a tingling beneath her skin. The mesh was accelerating its colonization. They pounded across the wet sand, legs burning, lungs screaming. The dunes seemed impossibly far. Behind them, orders were shouted, sharp and disciplined. The thud of boots on sand grew closer. A shot rang out, high-pitched, different from a conventional firearm. A zing passed Lena's head, not bullets, tranquilizer darts, or something worse. "Zigzag," Max shouted, shoving her sideways. They weaved desperately towards the relative cover of the dunes. Another dart whizzed past. They reached the edge of the first dune, collapsing behind its meager shelter. Sand sprayed around them as another dart hit the bank where they had just been. Lena gasped for air, her body trembling uncontrollably, a mixture of fear, exertion, and the escalating infection. Mac risked a look over the dune crest. The soldiers were advancing steadily, methodically, using hand signals, flanking them. The helicopter held its position, pinning them with the spotlight, ready to track them if they broke cover. "Trapped," Mac breathed, ducking back down. He looked at Lena, truly looked at her. Her face was flushed, eyes unnaturally bright, breath coming in shallow, wet gasps. The filaments on her glove, were they longer, thicker? He instinctively edged away slightly. Mac, Lena coughed, spitting blood onto the sand. Leave me. You can move faster alone, distract them. Mac hesitated for only a second. His survival instinct screamed at him to run, to save himself. Lena was compromised, slowing him down, drawing fire, but abandoning her meant facing Davy's team alone. And maybe there was still a chance for her. Maybe Dr. Reed, the CDC woman Lena had mentioned might be involved topside, could help. Wishful thinking, probably. No, he said curtly, his voice rough. They want us. Together we might find a way. He didn't sound convinced. He scanned the dunes around them. We need better cover, something they can't just surround. He pointed towards a darker shape further inland, a cluster of jagged rocks near the edge of the dunes. There, move. He grabbed her arm again, pulling her up. As Lena struggled to her feet, her vision flickered violently. The advancing soldiers momentarily warped, their forms overlaid with shimmering fungal shapes, their guns replaced by dripping appendages. The helicopter morphed into a giant, buzzing insect with multifaceted eyes. She cried out, stumbling back, shaking her head trying to clear the hallucination. The mesh wasn't just in her lungs, it was reaching her brain. Lena, Mac shouted, shaking her shoulder. Snap out of it, move. The momentary lapse was all the soldiers needed. They closed the distance rapidly. Shouted commands echoed. The spotlight locked onto them again. There was nowhere left to run without being completely exposed. Mac shoved Lena behind him, turning to face the approaching line of black-clad figures, wrench held high like a desperate club. They were hopelessly outnumbered, outgunned. The helicopter roared overhead. The submarine groaned its death throes behind them. Lena collapsed onto the sand, coughing, the world dissolving into hallucinatory fractals and the terrifying warmth spreading through her veins. Containment was closing in. Chapter 7: Bloom and Decay. The sand kicked up by pounding boots stung Lena's face as Mac hauled her behind the dune. The world swam in a nauseating kaleidoscope of green emergency lights, swirling white filaments, and the hard gray reality of the beach. The helicopter's spotlight bleached everything, erasing shadows, pinning them like insects under glass. Shouted commands, clipped and professional, cut through the rotor wash. They were boxing them in. Mac risked another look. 4 soldiers advanced in a wedge formation, weapons, tactical rifles tipped with underslung launchers, likely firing the darts held at the ready. 2 more were flanking wide, using the sparse dunes for cover, cutting off retreat towards the sea or further down the beach. Methodical, efficient, deadly. Can't stay here, Mac hissed, pulling Lena lower as a dart embedded itself in the dune crest above them with a pneumatic thump. Rocks! It's our only shot. Lena tried to push herself up, but her limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The warmth inside her chest was spreading, a tingling fire under her skin. Her vision blurred, the advancing soldiers momentarily replaced by shambling figures draped in pulsating fungal growths, their faces obscured by writhing mycelia. She cried out, recoiling from the phantom threat. Focus, Lena. Mac's voice was sharp, urgent. He gripped her shoulders, forcing her gaze towards him. Real soldiers, real guns, the rocks. His urgency cut through the haze momentarily. She nodded, clenching her teeth against the wave of nausea and the phantom itching beneath her skin. Mac moved first, low and fast, breaking cover and sprinting towards the next dune, angling inland towards the dark cluster of rocks. Lena forced herself to follow, stumbling, her breath catching in painful, wet gasps. A volley of darts followed them. One struck Mac's pack with a dull thud. He ripped it off without breaking stride, leaving it behind. Another grazed Lena's arm, tearing her sleeve but failing to penetrate the thick layers beneath. The soldiers didn't seem to be aiming to kill yet, focusing on incapacitation, containment, study. They scrambled behind another dune, closer to the rocks now, maybe 50 yards away. The soldiers adjusted their pursuit, maintaining discipline, relentless. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. A deep, groaning tremor rolled through the beach, originating from the beached submarine. Sand cascaded down the dune face. Lena cried out, thrown off balance. Max staggered, regaining his footing quickly. The submarine visibly sagged near the stern, buckling further under internal pressure. A fresh plume of black smoke and angry orange sparks erupted from a ruptured seam near the conning tower, momentarily obscuring the helicopter's view. The tremor seemed to disrupt the soldiers too. One stumbled, another paused to regain his bearings. Their formation faltered for a crucial second. "Now!" Mac yelled, seizing the opportunity. He grabbed Lena's hand, pulling her into the open. As they ran, Lena's coughing returned, worse than ever. A deep, body-racking convulsion that forced her to stop, doubling over. She felt something tear inside her chest. It wasn't just blood she sprayed onto the sand this time. A fine, shimmering cloud of near-invisible particles puffed out with her cough, catching the wind, swirling like motes of dust in the harsh spotlight beam. Spores, highly concentrated. The two closest soldiers, caught downwind, faltered. One ripped at his helmet visor, suddenly choking, his movements becoming frantic. The other stumbled back, rubbing furiously at his eyes, his rifle lowering. The spores, even if unable to penetrate their filtered suits immediately, were potent irritants, perhaps carrying hallucinogenic or psychoactive properties from the mesh. The soldiers further back saw their comrades' distress. "Gas, gas, check seals." A voice crackled over their comms, audible even over the helicopter. Their advance slowed, caution replacing speed. Mac didn't waste the opening. He half-dragged, half-carried Lena the remaining distance, plunging into the relative darkness offered by the cluster of jagged rocks. They collapsed behind a large, salt-scoured boulder, hearts pounding, lungs burning. The rocks offered better cover, multiple angles, narrow passages. Defensible, at least for a moment. Lena lay gasping on the cold, damp rock surface, her body trembling. The filaments on her glove were undeniably longer now, waving slightly, like tiny anemones sensing a current. Patches of her exposed skin looked pale, clammy, stretched taut over the growing pressure beneath. The transformation was accelerating, fueled by stress, exertion, and the failing reactor's ambient radiation. "Lena," Mac knelt beside her, his voice low. He reached out, then hesitated, his hand hovering over her shoulder, uncertainty warring with concern. He saw the subtle changes, the unnatural pallor, the tremor that wasn't just exhaustion. "It's fast," Lena whispered, her voice raspy. Another hallucination flickered, Mac's face overlaid with Merrick's ruined features, eyes burning with fungal light. She flinched away. "Stay back, Mac." He pulled his hand back, his expression grim. He peered cautiously around the edge of the boulder. The soldiers were regrouping, advancing more carefully now, aware of the potential biological hazard. Two were assisting their affected comrades who were still struggling, disoriented. The helicopter circled, its spotlight sweeping the rock cluster, trying to pinpoint their exact location. The ground trembled again, harder this time. A deep, sustained roar came from the submarine, the sound of catastrophic failure deep within its bowels. The air temperature spiked noticeably, even amidst the cold rain. The orange glow from the ruptured hull intensified, casting flickering, hellish shadows across the beach. Meltdown was no longer imminent. It was beginning. "Time's up," Mac muttered. He looked at Lena, curled up, shivering, coughing, lost in her internal battle. He looked at the advancing soldiers, resolute, armed, closing the net. He looked towards the dark sea, the howling wind. No escape there. He checked the heavy wrench in his hand, a primitive weapon against modern tactical gear. Futile. Yet he couldn't just surrender, not to Davy's butchers, not after what they'd seen, what Lena was becoming. A soldier emerged from behind an adjacent rock formation, rifle raised, moving with stealthy precision. He spotted them, his weapon centered on Mac. Mac reacted instantly, shoving Lena deeper into the crevice behind the boulder and launching himself forward, low and fast. He swung the heavy wrench in a desperate arc. The soldier, surprised by the sudden charge, fired. Not a dart this time, a burst of automatic fire. Bullets sparked off the rock near Mac's head, kicking up stone chips. He slammed into the soldier's legs, sending them both sprawling onto the wet sand and rock. The soldier's rifle flew from his grasp. Mac brought the wrench down hard, aiming for the helmeted head. A sickening crunch echoed in the narrow space. The soldier went limp. Mac scrambled back, grabbing the soldier's rifle. He checked the magazine, his movements jerky, fueled by adrenaline. Familiar Navy training surfaced from years past. He wasn't helpless. But the brief, violent encounter had pinpointed their location. Contact, subject engaged, moving to intercept. More figures converged on the rocks. Mac ducked back behind the boulder, pressing himself against the cold stone beside Lena. He could hear boots crunching on rock, shouted commands closing in from multiple directions. He chambered a round in the captured rifle. Lena moaned softly, her eyes rolling back slightly. The skin on her neck and hands was visibly changing, taking on a pale, almost luminous sheen. Thin, white filaments pushed through the pores like horrific acne, lengthening, writhing slowly. Her breathing was a wet, rattling struggle. The mesh was taking over, rewriting her biology at terrifying speed. Mac looked at her, then at the rifle in his hands, then towards the approaching sounds of the containment team. Trapped, the reactor melting down behind them, a biological horror unfolding beside him, and ruthless killers closing in front. He could try to fight his way out, maybe create a diversion, sacrifice himself to give Lena. What? A few more minutes before they captured her or the reactor blew. Or he could use his last moments to end her suffering, prevent her from becoming fully like the thing in the medical bay, a final, brutal act of mercy. The choice hung heavy in the air, colder than the Atlantic wind. Boots scraped closer. A flashlight beam swept across the rock face above them. Mac raised the rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger, aiming not at the approaching soldiers but towards the darkness where Lena lay, convulsing softly, the bloom beginning in earnest. The submarine screamed its final agony, a sound that tore through the air, promising imminent fiery oblivion. The helicopter's spotlight wavered as the ground bucked one last time. Mac's decision, the containment team's final approach, Lena's transformation, all poised on the knife edge of annihilation. Chapter 8: Scattering Seeds. The rifle felt alien in Mac's hands, heavy and cold. He sighted down the barrel, the rock crevice framing Lena's trembling form. Her breath hitched in a wet, tearing sound, no longer human. Pale luminescence pulsed beneath her skin. The mesh was blooming within her, turning her into something else. His finger tightened on the trigger. A clean shot, an ending, mercy. No. He couldn't. Not like this. Some broken fragment of hope, or perhaps just sheer, stubborn refusal to be the executioner, made him lower the rifle muzzle a fraction. He couldn't condemn her, nor could he simply wait for Davies, men to take her apart in a lab. He spun, bracing the rifle stock against his shoulder, aiming towards the scrape of boots on rock just beyond the boulder. If he was going down, he'd take some of them with him. The decision was made for him. With a final, deafening shriek that transcended metal fatigue and became a sound of pure elemental rupture, the K-329 detonated. It wasn't a conventional explosion, not at first. The air itself seemed to ignite. An incandescent sphere of white-hot energy blossomed outwards from the submarine's midsection, vaporizing steel, sand, and seawater instantly. The shockwave hit like a physical blow, traveling faster than sound. The helicopter, caught too close despite its ascent, wobbled violently, rotors struggling against the pressure wave before cartwheeling backwards, shedding debris, and vanishing into the churning smoke and steam cloud boiling up from the beach. The rock cluster Mac and Lena sheltered within offered scant protection. The boulder they hid behind lifted momentarily, slammed back down with bone-jarring force. Mac was thrown against the rock face, the captured rifle flying from his grasp. Pain exploded in his shoulder, his head connecting hard with stone. Darkness encroached on his vision. Through the roaring chaos, he saw Lena. The initial blast wave seemed to flow around her. The pale luminescence coating her skin flared brilliantly, the fibrous growths covering her body whipping outwards like streamers in a gale. She arched backwards, no longer coughing but emitting a high-frequency keen that pierced even the roar of the explosion. The mesh, reacting to the intense radiation spike, the sheer energy release, underwent a final, explosive metamorphosis. Her body contorted, split, not in gore but in growth. Thick, pearlescent stalks erupted from her back, her limbs, unfurling with unnatural speed into complex frond-like structures that pulsed with soft light. Her skin cracked open, revealing not flesh but a dense, interwoven lattice of mycelia. Her face became unrecognizable, features dissolving into a smooth fungal mask from which countless fine, shimmering filaments extruded, tasting the irradiated air. She wasn't Lena anymore. She was a bloom, a biological engine converting raw energy into rampant, alien growth. Then the secondary blast hit the concussive force and the debris storm. Rocks shattered, sand scoured. The world dissolved into roaring white noise, unbearable heat and impact. Mac felt a searing pain in his leg, then nothing. Silence returned gradually, uneasily. The roar faded to a crackling, hissing landscape. Where the submarine had lain, there was now a deep, water-filled crater boiling with residual heat. Twisted, glowing fragments of metal lay scattered across hundreds of yards, embedded in the dunes, floating in the turbulent surf. The black helicopter was gone, likely obliterated or thrown far out to sea. The beach was a ruin, shrouded in radioactive steam and the thick, acrid smoke of burning materials. Mac gasped, consciousness returning in jagged shards of pain. He was half buried in sand and rock debris. His left leg was trapped beneath a heavy chunk of stone, pain radiating upwards, hot and sickening. His head throbbed, dried blood crusting his temple. He blinked, trying to clear his vision. The air tasted foul, ozone, burnt chemicals, irradiated steam, and beneath it all, stronger than ever, the sweet, cloying scent of the mycelial mesh. He coughed weakly, the familiar metallic tang flooding his mouth. He was breathing it in, the fallout, the scattered spores. He pushed himself up slightly, ignoring the agony in his leg. Where was Lena? Where were the soldiers? The rock cluster was devastated. Boulders were cracked, displaced. He saw shapes amidst the debris. One was clearly a soldier from Davy's team, body twisted at an unnatural angle, tactical gear shredded, helmet cracked open. Dead. Another lay nearby, partially buried, unmoving. Further off, he saw a third figure crawling weakly away from the blast zone, trailing smoke, uniform charred. The containment team had been caught in the blast radius, decimated. Then he saw her, or what remained. Not far from where they had sheltered, a bizarre structure pulsed with faint, internal light. It resembled a large, intricately structured coral formation or a giant, grotesque puffball mushroom, easily 8 feet tall. Pearlescent stalks rose from a central mass, their frond-like tips gently waving in the irradiated breeze, releasing slow clouds of shimmering spores into the smoky air. Fine, white filaments carpeted the ground around its base, pulsing rhythmically. At the core of the structure, dimly visible through the translucent layers, was a shape vaguely reminiscent of a human torso, fused, absorbed. Lena. The bloom. It had anchored itself, thriving in the post-detonation energy bath, already seeding the contaminated wind. Max stared, horrified yet strangely detached, shock numbing the edges of his terror. The organism hadn't just survived. The reactor breach had been fertilizer. It had achieved its next stage. The crawling soldier collapsed, succumbing to injuries or radiation or both. Silence descended again, broken only by the crackle of burning debris, the hiss of steam, and the soft, rhythmic pulsing of the bloom. Mac knew he was dying, trapped, irradiated, breathing in spores with every gasp. Davy's containment had failed utterly. The explosion hadn't sterilized the threat. It had aerosolized it, weaponized it. Spores carried on the wind, settling into the ravaged dunes, washing into the churning sea, carried inland by the smoke plume. Fragments of the submarine coated in the resilient mesh, flung far and wide by the blast. The crawling soldier, perhaps others further out, potentially carrying infections if they survived long enough to be found. Lena, the bloom, a radioactive, spore-generating monument on the poisoned shore. Escape was contagion. It wasn't contained. It was unleashed. He coughed again, a deep, wet sound. He felt the telltale tingling beneath his own skin, the faint pressure behind his eyes. It wouldn't be long now. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the rock. The sweet smell filled his senses. He thought of the deep, cold ocean, the pressure, the things that lurked in the dark. They hadn't stayed down there. They had found a vessel. And now they were scattering their seeds on the wind. The pulsing light from the bloom cast faint shadows on the ruined beach. The tide began to creep in, swirling around the cooling wreckage, carrying particles of metal, ash, and shimmering spores out into the vast, indifferent Atlantic. The horror wasn't over. It was just beginning. The end.